Welcome. We're going to be targeting some lake trout today, trolling for these big beautiful fish. The lake that we are fishing has cutthroat and lake trout, so we'll probably catch a mix of fish today, but we're going to be particularly targeting lake trout. Come along with us as we head out to the lake and put some nice fish in the boat. And remember, we do them how we do them, because that's how we do them.
Got a 50 feeder on.
It didn't take long for us to hook up on the first fish of the day. Looks like it's a cutthroat. Hopefully we get into lake trout here soon.
Got a Cisco in his mouth. Oh.
Big fish on here, boys.
You're not even gaining on him. Nice and easy, just nice.
Don't horse him.
I only got 12 pound on.
Here we go, we're hooked up now. This feels like a really heavy fish. Tate's got a lake trout on. Let's see how big it's gonna be.
Yep, just no slack, but just nice and easy.
We don't care if it takes you an hour, bro. Don't lose him. We got old Tatum out here in freezing cold weather from Texas. Hopefully you don't get hypothermia from reeling this fish in. Don't horse him.
Nice and easy. He may go crap when he sees the boat. Yeah, that was cool.
Don't fight him like some of our friends. The nice mountains in the background.
Alright, hold on.
Reeling in the Bear Lake record right here.
Yeah, I think you're good. You're real nice and easy. It's a laker, it's a big one. Just
Whoa.
nice and easy.
Don't need to go down that much.
Yeah, just super slow from here on out.
If we're annoying, it's because we've lost a lot of fish, okay?
You get him out of that motor. Take the tip of that. Yep.
Remember, when fishing for lake trout, take your time and reel them up slowly. They have an air bladder, and if this air bladder doesn't adjust because you reel them up too fast, you probably end up killing the fish.
Real slow, man.
Here, Mike, it's in the weight.
Oh, oh boy. Get him. Oh yeah.
Woo! I knew he was a hog when I felt him. Yes, sir. Is the deck clear? Back in there, Peter. Woo! And then grab that tail. There you go. Hurry up, Mike. Oh. Wait. Ready?
I want to talk about running a spoon behind a downrigger and the advantages of running a spoon. So typically spoons are going to run a lot flatter than crankbaits. And the distance that you let your line out behind the ball can be important. Sometimes the fish like the lure right behind the ball. Sometimes you have to let up to 150 feet of line out and clip it in behind your ball if they're spooky. Typically lake trout are curious and they'll come up to your downrigger ball and check things out, but sometimes you need a farther setback to catch these fish. So we got a downrigger ball here as you can see, with my release and a clip with the spoon on it here. And this spoon's going to run fairly flat. So if we're targeting fish down at 90 feet deep, I would probably run my downrigger ball around 80 or 85 feet down, and I wouldn't be afraid to let this spoon out fairly far back behind the downrigger ball, because this spoon is going to run fairly flat. Typically the fish are going to attack from below coming up. So the advantage of a spoon is I almost always know what depth it's running at when I'm trolling. And that's why I like trolling spoons.
This thing ain't budging.
Kurt with the big one.
Kurt's hooked up. Looks like another great fish. Let's see how big this lake trout is.
Real fast you can and get the next one out.
Headed towards that pole.
You're alright.
It's a good place to catch one, right? Go ahead.
Mike with the end of your pole. There you go. You guys are dumping.
I think Mike's overing.
Mike, you're over him. You're really damn too. Grab another pole.
Set that down.
Here's what you get.
100.
There he is.
I got a tangled net here.
There, you caught one!
Finally. Finally a lake.
Yes! There, you caught one!
Finally. Finally a Laker. Woo! That's a nice fish.
Woo-hoo! Bono!
Another great bait, as we talked about, is crankbaits. Sometimes spoons just aren't working that day and you need to use a crankbait. So here we got a crankbait set up on our downrigger. Now, the advantage to a crankbait, it's going to imitate a bait fish very well. The disadvantage to trolling a crankbait on a downrigger is that the crankbait is going to dive. So if we troll this crankbait really close to our downrigger release clip, then we're going to know exactly where this crankbait is running in the water column, because if we troll say 5 feet behind our release clip, we know it may dive a foot or so underneath the ball, and that's it. So when we're marking fish on our graph, we'll still be able to put this crankbait in just above the fish so they can attack up. Now the downside is if the bite is off that day and you have finicky fish and you have to do farther setbacks from the downrigger ball, the farther you let this crankbait out behind the downrigger, the further it dives, and then we're guessing. So if we're letting out 100 feet of line on this particular crankbait and we're fishing in 90 feet of water and we want to fish just off the bottom, we may be running our downrigger ball up at 70 because at 100 feet back, this crankbait is going to dive up to 20 feet down. So crankbaits can be a little bit more finicky on what depth they run because the bigger the bill, the deeper they dive. Now there is ways to get around this, but it can be a little bit more tricky. So you guys will have to decide whether you like to run a combination of crankbaits and spoons, or if you like to do as we do and mainly fish with spoons for lake trout, because we're able to target the depth and be a lot more accurate where we're setting our downriggers and running our gear.
How much line you got out?
24.
I see it. Watch out, Keita. Yeah. Good job. Woo! Another Laker. There we go. Yeah. We'll get him in a second. You can keep filming that. Gotta show Kate.
Don't be afraid of little fish, dude.
Hurry, let's go.
Are you talking to us, Kurt? Give us a play-by-play.
Yeah, give us a play-by-play, please.
Watch out for the bears. Oh yeah, look at that.
Well, the morning bite was mainly lake trout. As the afternoon rolled on, it seemed like the cutthroat were biting and we couldn't find any lake trout, but at least we're catching fish.
Good job, Spencer.
Keep coming. Keep coming. Keep coming.
Oh, got him.
Yeah!
Look at that.
Don't go any shallower than 60 if you can, Kurt. Let's go. Touch it. Touch it or I'm going to have it. Touch it or I'm going to put it in your face. Okay, put it back in the water. Maverick. I know.
Are you out of the downrigger now?
Oh yeah, he's been out for a while.
Popped out.
Did you lose him? He's still there.
Oh, he's there. I think he's just swimming at us. Oh, there's him.
Good cut. Nice fish. It's a nice cut. Oh yeah, look at that cut. That's a big one. Yes, sir.